So last year, the Standing Committee formed the Spirit of Life team with the charge to listen to members and friends, share our perspectives around 4 questions about our congregational life as we continue to move out of COVID. How and where is First Parish flourishing? How and where do we need to grow? What challenges are we facing? And what do we need to let go of? The team will present their findings from these conversations at our all-congregational State of the Society meeting after church next Sunday, October 6th. So I'm not going to go into great detail now. But I will share that 2 words appeared repeatedly: community, of course, and communication. Community was cited as our strength, as the reason many of us joined and why many of us stay. We are a friendly, welcoming, and generous group of people, caring of one another, caring of this congregation, of Unitarian Universalism, and the larger world. There was also an expressed desire to grow our community, to become more diverse, and to attract more families and younger people. Communication, on the other hand, is something we need to work on. This is a busy, busy place, and people often feel that they are not up to speed in terms of knowing what's happening and who to talk to about things. But more importantly, we recognize that we are not always good at external communication, what some traditions call evangelism, letting our larger community know who we are and what our mission is, what our Unitarian Universalist faith is all about and why it matters, not just to us, but to the world. What Arneson and Rollins called our saving story. And honestly, if we do want to grow our community and become more diverse and see more families and younger people, we need better communication skills. While most Unitarian Universalists would say they are spiritual but not religious individuals, Unitarian Universalism is actually a religion. And thus, our primary practice is worship. It may not be what matters most to individuals, but it matters most to us as a congregation, a community. Because worship is the primary way we communicate about our community, who we are, what matters to us, and why we trust in this particular faith to transform our lives and our world. Worship is our primary practice of invitation. A few years before COVID, we made the decision to renovate our building to make it more accessible. We put in a new entranceway with a ramp. We put accessible bathrooms on both floors. And we put in an elevator that did not require a trained operator with 2 keys. Which, by the way, was a big step when it happened in the first place. So we have come a long way. It took us a long time to commit to this project. And we spent several years discussing how much it would cost and how to pay for it. Those were our 2 big questions. The conversation shifted, though, when we moved away from those technical questions to ones about our faith, our values, our covenant. How did this building that we love help us live into our covenant, our Unitarian Universalist faith? And what obstacles did our building present? How could we make our building more reflective of our covenant? How could we make it more invitational. I probably don't need to remind you that we are living in fraught and anxious times. And people are looking, they are searching for meaning, for hope, for sanctuary, for community. And I believe that we do have a transformative, life-giving story to offer, one that puts love, not fear, not judgment, not power, at the center. So it's very important that we ask the same kinds of questions about our worship that we did about our building. What does our worship communicate about our community, about our faith? What is the transformative story we have to offer for a world that is full of both beauty and brokenness? What's our invitation? Because here's the thing about religious community that makes it different than other kinds of community, because there are a lot of different kinds of community out there. A community that engages in the act of worship is not just about the people gathered in the room at this time. Worship at its best connects us with memory, with the generations past who worshiped here before us, with those we love and mourn, as well as those we never knew, but who in the generations before us were stewards of this place and this faith. And this is particularly resonant in a community like ours, whose roots go back to 1655, with some of our ancestors literally in our backyard. At the same time, worship also lives forward in hopeful imagination. In worship, we strive to embody and practice the community we hope will come into being, that we long for our children and for our children's children. The community whose story will transform the lives of the people it touches for generations to come. We don't own this community. We don't own this congregation. We are just the stewards of it for this time. Finally, worship strives to connect us to the spirit of something larger than ourselves. In a lot of religion, this is God. And our Unitarian and Universalist heritages each began in the Protestant Christian tradition. But as a covenantal religion, as opposed to a creedal one, we have always had a changing and expansive theological grounding, where naturalism, humanism, paganism, Buddhism, agnosticism, atheism, and different variations in understanding of God or goddess or the divine are welcomed. And sometimes we're more welcoming of others, depending on the time. Having grown up a Unitarian Universalist in a Unitarian Universalist congregation, I've witnessed our evolving theological emphases. When I was a kid, our Unitarian heritage was at the fore, and humanism was the dominant theology. As its name implies, it put the potential and goodness of the human spirit at the center. And the emphasis was on reason, individual conscience, and freedom of thought. We are very much a religion of the mind. And as a result, we focused on the Word, not the Bible, but the exploration of ideas through sermons and lectures and talks. And we let go of worship practices that didn't make intellectual sense. Rituals like communion or prayer. But things continue to evolve, and some people coming into Unitarian Universalism felt the need to connect with something more than just their minds in worship. They wanted prayer, meditation, and ritual in our worship. Practices that move the hearts and souls as well as the mind, and that recognize the importance of community as well as the individual. Rituals and rites of passage like lighting the chalice, which, by the way, was not part of Unitarian Universalism when I was a kid. Water and flower communions, which were not part of Unitarian Universalism when I was a kid. Coming of age, which was not part of Unitarian Universalism when I was a kid. All of these things have come in more recently. I think also in that time we witnessed the fallibilities and even the darker side of humanity, and recognized that human progress is not something that moves forward, onward, and upward forever, but goes in fits and starts. We also saw that evil is real and very human. And finally, we realized that we are not the center of creation, but only part of a much larger interdependent web. And that by putting ourselves at the center, we've actually put our planet at risk. So the changes to the UUA covenant that we spoke partly today reflects these theological shifts, as now our universalist heritage is reasserting itself and putting love at our spiritual center. If you read through the whole covenant, you will see that our purposes and our 7 principles are still very much there and restated in our 6 shared values. But as the opening words to our revised covenant state, love is the power that holds us together and is at the center of our shared values. We are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love. So, how does our worship space and how does our worship communicate this about our community? Who and what does it invite? And what are the barriers? Does it reflect the transformative story we are telling for our times? How does it invite the power of love to hold us together? Not just in here, but out there. My response, no surprise, is going to be a both and rather than an either or. This beautiful, beautiful and elegant sanctuary connects us to our ancestors. This pulpit and these pews were built for when the word was central, when people gathered in worship to listen to what the preacher had to say. And our Puritan and Unitarian heritages are very evident in that way. We are to be seated, somewhat uncomfortably, I suspect, so that we don't fall asleep. So you can look up here and have your minds inspired, hopefully. But there's not a lot of room to move, especially to dance, right? And 22 years in, I will confess that I'm not totally comfortable up here. I feel separated from you, which doesn't really reflect my personality or my preferred style of leading worship. I generally stay up here because I know it makes it easier to hear me and to see me. But I feel like I'm behind a barrier. And I remember the first time I saw this pulpit when I was pre-candidating to be your minister, and it scared me. But not as much as the one at the other church I was talking to, which would have required me to climb up a rope ladder to the pulpit. I'm serious, true. That stood over and above the pews. And when I found out I was pregnant with Henry, it made me even more glad that I accepted this call, as I imagined trying to navigate that ladder for 9 months. He's 21 now, by the way. That said, I love the simple and elegant beauty of this sanctuary. I love how the big, clear windows invite the world into our worship. Sunny days and rainy days and snowy days and the colors and changes of the season. We are in the world, not separated from it in the ways that fancy stained glass or a cavernous cathedral might. I love that it's an old space. I love knowing that there were generations who have been worshiping here for hundreds of years. And if we do this well, we'll do so for hundreds of years after us. I love that it is built for music as much as for words. And I especially love that come December, it will be filled with the scent of donuts and of greens. And on Christmas Eve, the light of candles and the sounds of carols. Most of all, I love that it is our gathering space, that it brings us together, whether we are here physically in the room or watching from home. Things are changing all around us. Technology allows us to worship from home as well as here. Our next hymnal will not be a book. It will be virtual. One that can be updated regularly with new songs without having to cut down so many trees. Discerning between what is essential and eternal in our worship versus what is a matter of comfort and habit is an important practice of invitational faith. If we want families and younger people, if we want greater diversity, then our worship practices need to invite and reflect that. As we enter yet another contentious election season, as we recognize the fragility of our planet and our lives on it in the face of war and violence and climate change, I believe that people need to hear the transformative and saving story of our Unitarian Universalist faith within and beyond our walls. It matters because, as Emerson said, a community will worship something, and what we worship, we are becoming.